Some people in Louisiana are fighting for new trials after being convicted under so-called Jim Crow juries. Up until just a few years ago, people accused of a crime in the state could be convicted without a unanimous jury decision. Wesley Lowery brings us a preview of a new 60 Minutes Plus report on this issue.
So how's the transition back been since you've been out?
Jermaine Hudson was just 20 years old in 1999 when he was pulled over for a traffic stop. He was told there was a warrant out for his arrest for armed robbery. Hudson had been arrested before, and his mugshot was included in a photographic lineup, and the accuser chose his photo. He was charged and convicted by a 10-2 split jury.
Do you remember what it was like when that verdict came down?
It's like everything went black. My body went numb. I couldn't hear anything. It was like, wow, what just happened?
What was the sentence?
99 years.
And you were how old?
I was 20 years old.
Hudson would spend the next 22 years in prison for a crime that not only did he not commit, but one that never even happened in the first place. Earlier this year, his accuser recanted, admitting that he made up the robbery so he could avoid telling his parents he had spent his money on drugs.
Now, at the time, did you know that the jury was non-unanimous, that they were split?
No, I didn't know. I didn't know at all.
If prosecutors had to get all 12 people, they couldn't have convicted you.
They couldn't have convicted me.
So you never would have gone to prison for all those years for something that you didn't do.
That's right.
Hudson was released earlier this year after his accuser confessed to District Attorney Jason Williams that he had sent an innocent man to prison.
What did being incarcerated for all of those years take from you?
It took me. It took my freedom. It took me away from my children. My oldest daughter, she was 10 months when I left. My youngest daughter was born two weeks after I got incarcerated. So I had to watch them grow up, and that was hard. It was a painful thing to go through, but I thank everybody that really supported me and my family, especially the prisoners still in the same situation I was in, because I'm quite sure you have more guys like myself that were actually innocent.
And Wesley joins us now with more. Wes, can you explain how this split jury law originated and when it was finally taken off the books? It's hard to believe this was still around so recently.
Of course. So the split jury provision in Louisiana was created during a constitutional convention that was called not long after the Civil War, after emancipation. Now in Louisiana, this convention was called explicitly, they said it, to, quote, retain a system of white supremacy, right? Slavery had fallen, and Southern legislators were very upset about this, right? And so what they did was they passed the split jury provision where as long as 9 jurors at the time voted to convict you, that was enough. You no longer had to get to 12. The idea of this was that it would make it easier to continue to convict, at the time, black men and women, and eventually all people of color, even as black people were now able to serve on juries because they had exited slavery.
Were they still predominantly white juries at the time?
Yes, well, we're talking about 1896, I believe. So they were exclusively white juries at that juncture, and eventually would add people of color. Now, these laws stayed on the books in Louisiana until just a handful of years ago, and then even once voters overturned the split jury provision, making them like most other states where you now have to get all 12 jurors, it didn't do anything as it related to retroactivity. So there were, and there still are, 1,600 people incarcerated in Louisiana who were convicted by a non-unanimous jury, where there's some of the jurors in the final tally said this person is innocent, they shouldn't be convicted. And so in most other states in the country, that would have been a mistrial at the very least. And you've got people serving, in some cases, life sentences on those convictions.
So there are 16 other people in Louisiana in Jermaine's same circumstances? And what's being
1,600.
1,600. And what's being done to fix this?
So what we're seeing is, again, the voters in Louisiana passed a ballot initiative, meaning that no one additionally could be convicted by a split jury. The Supreme Court ruled, ultimately, even following that yes, this is clearly unconstitutional. But because they said, or despite the fact they said that split juries were unconstitutional, the Supreme Court did not apply that ruling retroactively, right? That's how you end up with this universe of people who are convicted this way. The Supreme Court says their convictions are unconstitutional, but they have no recourse. what we're seeing is activists on the ground, much of this activism led by formerly incarcerated people themselves, who are fighting to try to get a new state law passed that might grant new trials to all of these folks, or petitioning at the very least for the state Supreme Court to come in and do what the U.S. Supreme Court didn't do, which is basically say, look, if this type of conviction is unconstitutional, then people who were convicted under it should receive a new trial, right? This was one of the weird legal wonky things where the Supreme Court said, this is unconstitutional, but we're not going to do anything about all the people who suffered under it already. We're just saying it can't happen in the future. And so the fight remains, how do we go in, how do the voters in Louisiana go in and try to rectify and restore some sense of fairness and justice to the 1,600 people who are currently behind bars on a conviction where some of their jurors said they should not have been convicted.
I mean, and in this case, after spending 22 years of his life in prison for a crime he didn't commit, what's next for Jermaine?
So Jermaine's trying to figure life out again. He's rebuilding his relationships with his family. He's starting to figure out work, and he's also really dove in to the activism around these issues. He experienced it firsthand, and he's got friends, people who he spent the last decades with, still incarcerated, who are in similar situations. Again, the reason Jermaine ended up getting out is because the prosecutor in New Orleans decided to proactively review all of the cases in his jurisdiction where there had been a split jury conviction. But in other jurisdictions across Louisiana, people like Jermaine are still just sitting in prison without anyone looking back at their case to see, wait a second, was there ever actually enough evidence? Or is the only reason this person is in prison because we were able to convict them without actually getting all 12 jurors?
Wesley Lowery, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And you can stream this full 60 Minutes Plus report right now on Paramount Plus.